Well, it's a difficult day today, a very difficult day. Not just what happened in Haifa before, what happened at Kfar Giladi. We've taken hits, we've taken losses today, and that's a lot of funerals tomorrow in Israel. But I think this just makes us more resolved and more determined to deal with this issue seriously, and that is to create a situation, both a military and a political situation, where never again can Hezbollah be the sort of regional threat that it is. Never again can this extremist group, armed, supported by the Iranians, create this sort of damage to the civilian population.
When you say that, Mark Regev, when you say that this has to be never again, it raises the question of just how much time do you think Israel needs? Does Israel believe it needs in order to dismantle Hezbollah, given that your Prime Minister Ehud Olmert said a number of days ago that Hezbollah's infrastructure had already been completely destroyed, quote unquote?
I mean, I think we have been hitting Hezbollah and we've been hitting them hard, and what we're seeing is this residual capacity. It's got to be remembered, and we've spoken about this in the past, that for the last decade, I mean, Hezbollah has been receiving a huge amount of weaponry, rockets, missiles from Iran, from Syria, and those missiles are now fired at the Israeli civilian population. I think the strategy is to clean out those parts of South Lebanon, to neutralize the Hezbollah fortresses there, those strongholds from which they come out and fire the rockets. That our land forces are doing at the moment, to hit their strategic launching potential further north, and ultimately to move into a ceasefire that will be a political package that will cut off Hezbollah from Iran, from Syria, not allow them to be rearmed, not allow them to return to the south, and then to start a process which is in UN resolutions, which calls on Hezbollah to be dismantled, to be disarmed as a military organization. That's the real solution.
That's the real solution, you say, but every day this conflict continues and we see rising casualties on both sides of the Lebanese-Israeli border. Is it your conviction that this conflict can be contained?
Well, we will do nothing proactive to expand this conflict. We don't want to see Syria involved. We don't want to see Iran involved either. But it's very important that Hezbollah that started this conflict, Hezbollah that initiated this crisis, does not come out of this conflict feeling that they have the upper hand. And that's why it's so important that we do succeed in cleaning out South Lebanon from their presence, that we don't have a situation where there are Hezbollah strongholds left in the south, that we have a situation where they are cut off from their suppliers, that their link with Iran and Syria is broken, and that as we move into a ceasefire, it's understood that the international community is determined to bring about the implementation of its own resolutions, of that Security Council resolution number 1559, which says Hezbollah must be disarmed. That's good for Lebanon, it's good for Israel, it's good for everyone in the region.
You say you don't want to see the end of this conflict leaving Hezbollah thinking that they have the upper hand. Doesn't that raise the question, though, that if Hezbollah doesn't lose, then it's won in a sense?
I think we've got to make it very clear that Hezbollah is losing this conflict. They have the ability to strike at us, but we believe every day that this is going on, they are weakened and further weakened. I was earlier today at an intelligence briefing, and we have no doubt that we are seeing only now residual capacity of Hezbollah. And if we succeed in cutting off their ability to be rearmed and resupplied by Iran, by Syria, I think that's part of the solution. And then we have to move forward with their disarmament. I mean, if you think about it logically, what is the reason that inside Lebanon you have this independent military machine, answerable to no one except the Iranians, a proxy for outside extremists? It really does Lebanon no good. On the contrary, it prevents Lebanon from being truly independent and sovereign.
Mark, well, just one final question, if I may. You say that Iran and Syria are rearming Hezbollah continually, even as this conflict progresses and enters its 26th day. How can you stop them being rearmed, and do you intend to stop them?
Well, at the moment, we are preventing rearmament by having the Israeli Air Force active, hitting their resupply activities. But what I'm talking about is when we move towards that ceasefire that's being discussed today in the Security Council, we have to create guarantees, we have to create mechanisms to prevent the rearmament of Hezbollah. Ultimately, if Hezbollah rearms, then they'll be there to fight another day. It's very important to cut them off from their natural suppliers. That can be done in two ways. One, there can be international pressure on the suppliers, on the regimes in Iran and in Syria, that if they continue to rearm Hezbollah, after the international community has said in resolution after resolution that Hezbollah must be disarmed, if they nevertheless continue to supply Hezbollah with rockets and with missiles there's consequences for them in the international community. And the other part of the equation is, of course, a beefed up presence on the Lebanese side of the border, making sure that any armaments that come into Lebanon don't go to this extremist jihadist organisation, but go only to the Lebanese government.